Welcome back, everyone, to Twisted History. I'm Jeremy, and today we will be covering a really unheard of topic, the Boer War. Let's get right into it and examine what happened. So, despite Canada's confederacy, they still remained true to the British Empire as one of its colonies. In 1899, Canada would be involved in its first conflict as a nation. The main cause of the Boer War was the restrictions of political rights by the Boers to the increasing influx of foreigners from Britain and its colonies, many of which worked in the gold mines of Transvaal, and pardon me if I butchered that name. The gold mines, however, were another factor for the British to take action. Afrikaners, the descendants of Protestant Dutch, French, and German refugees, had created Transvaal and the Orange Free State after the British had taken control over the Cape Colony, which was where they originally settled. Unwilling to comply with British rule, they had established these other colonies. Personally, I could see why these guys would be slightly disgruntled. Like, first the Brits come in and basically take over, then they start trying to take your shit. Like, how polite is that, eh? Anyways, in October of 1899, after Britain had moved many troops into the area, the Boer governments had made a military strike preemptively against the increasing British troops in the area. Now engulfed in war, Britain had appealed for help from its colonies. Before the conflict began, Canadian Parliament had passed a resolution to support the British. The opinions on helping Britain and South Africa were split between the English Canadians and the French Canadians, as the English supported the British cause and the French had seen the rise of British imperialism as a threat to their culture. Now, you're really going to notice a trend throughout our history with the French Canadians, if you haven't already, and you're going to see that a majority of resistance to literally anything comes from the Quebec area, but I digress. Without a standing professional army at the time, the government was allowed to enlist a token force of 1,000 volunteer infantrymen. For the first time in Canadian history, we would send soldiers overseas in Canadian uniforms into battle. Deemed the gallant thousand by Minister of Militia Frederick Borden, the 1,000 men had formed the Royal Canadian Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel William Otter. Over the duration of the war, 3 more contingents of soldiers had arrived, including 5 divisions of Canadian mounted rifles, 3 batteries of field artillery, and many guerrilla fighters. Some significant battles that Canada played a part in would be Paardeberg, Lellefontaine, and Boschbult. My apologies if I absolutely butchered those names once again. The Battle of Paardeberg occurred on February the 17th, 1899. After 9 days of constant artillery, 1,000 Canadian troops had been sent to deal with a Boer force of 5,000. Backed by around 15,000 British soldiers, the Canadians had been sent to assault the Boer encampment with infantry. William Otter's forces were sent into battle on February the 26th for a daring night attack. After several hours of fighting, the Boers surrendered to the Canadians in the morning. As the first significant victory of the war was won, Canada was suddenly the spotlight of the Empire. However, 31 Canadians had died at Paardeberg. The next battle, the Battle of Lellefontaine, occurred in November of 1900. When the British had captured Bloemfontein and Pretoria, the president of Transvaal, Paul Kruger, had fled to Europe. Rather than surrender, the remaining Boer forces resorted to guerrilla tactics and would use this style of fighting for 2 years. On November the 7th of 1900, intent on capturing supplies, including the guns of the Royal Canadian Artillery, the Boer Guerrillas had launched an attack at Lellefontaine Farm. At the rear of the supply column, soldiers of the Royal Canadian Dragoons had fought for 2 hours against the Boers on horseback. The Dragoons were successful in holding off the Boers, but 3 Canadians died while 3 others were injured in battle. One of the wounded was Lieutenant Richard Turner, who would be awarded the Victoria Cross and would later serve as a general in World War I. The last noteworthy battle, the Battle of Boschbult, happened on March 31st of 1902. On Easter Monday of 1902, the Battle of Boschbult Farm involved an outnumbered British force of 1,800 facing a Boer unit 2,500 strong. Setting up defenses in the farm buildings, they held off many series of charges and attacks by the mounted enemy soldiers. On the furthermost edge of the defensive line, 21 men of the Canadian Mounted Riflemen, led by Lieutenant Bruce Carruthers, fought against the constantly charging Boers. Cut off and surrounded for hours, 13 Canadians had been killed, most of which were from the Canadian Mounted Riflemen, and at least another 40 were wounded in combat. All in all, the Boer War claimed 60,000 lives, 270 of which Canadians, and a large majority of which civilians in British internment camps. Although it may have been a Pyrrhic victory for Britain, Canadians at home had celebrated their military accomplishments with pride, creating a new self-confidence for Canada. Thank you so very much for listening, and stick around for the next episode coming out shortly about the First World War. And in the meantime, have yourself a good one, eh?